Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is our Burning Issues edition. It's always a pleasure to have this issue, this Burning Issues edition, where the Square resident panelists talk about what you, the public, have put forward to us on our social media platforms, via emails, as well as just even reaching out to us. So the topics we're going to talk about, one, is to start with the Made in Rwanda campaign. 5 years after its launch, we want to understand how it's doing, the review of Made in Rwanda campaign and its contributions to the economy. And we're also going to touch on the reopening of schools. As many of you know, September was a month scheduled for schools to reopen in Rwanda based on the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also going to look at the Rwanda airport reopen, Kigali International Airport. We're going to understand how it is to travel during this crisis, during this pandemic. Joining me are the Square resident panelists. My name is Jen Mpisi, host of The Square. I'm always very happy to have burning issues with the Square resident panelists. Berna, I would like to introduce you. I love your dress. Because we're talking about Made in Rwanda, I love the fact that you're wearing Made in Rwanda Uzi collections. How are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you, Dana.
Great. Charlie, same for you. How are you tonight?
Same here, Dana. You girls look amazing. How are you?
So do you, gentlemen. Usually we have a midweek highlights where we talk about things that have caught our attention. But because this is burning issues, we try and fit as many topics into our 55 minutes that we have. So we'll go straight into the topics that we have lined up. Like I said earlier on, Made in Rwanda campaign, schools reopening in September or not, as well as airports reopening in this month, August. The first I would like to start with is the Made in Rwanda campaign. And, since 2015, Made in Rwanda campaign has made very many inroads in helping our trade deficit, promoting local products and services in Rwanda, and so forth and so on. And we've seen this, that it's diversified. Initially, I think Berna and Charles will agree with me, Made in Rwanda was really to do with textiles and arts and crafts and garments, but it has diversified. We have, VW, Volkswagen, electric mobility solutions. We also have Ampersand. These are electric motors that are being assembled in Rwanda. And since 2015, if you'll allow me to read a bit of some numbers, we have official figures that state that around 510 billion was given to the Made in Rwanda campaign, contributed to the economy, and also a performance of non-traditional exports has been linked to the Made in Rwanda program. So there's a lot to do with Made in Rwanda as a campaign, as a policy, and right now we just want to give a review with the resident panelists on The Square, understanding in terms of quality, in terms of contributing to the economy, in terms of contributing to the trade deficit that we're trying to narrow down. And I'll start with you, Charles, in terms of what you think can be done better and what your general view is 5 years down the lane.
First of all, I think generally it's no one would second guess this. It's without doubt a step in the right direction. And there's quite a number of success stories that we can talk about. Initially, indeed, as you said, we're just thinking about textiles, and I have a cousin who just used to import rolls of cloth, and then they would just put a Made in Rwanda campaign and stitch them, and it would just be it would look like the same T-shirt that you find in Tede Meal. Over time, well, that's probably about 5 years ago. Over time, things have changed quite significantly. But I think when it comes to quality, again, there's quite a lot of steps in the right direction. And initially, people would think that if it's supposed to be made in Rwanda, and I'm sure there are still a few people who think that it's supposed to be cheap. Now, if you want to be cheap, then you should not be Rwandan. If you want to be cheap, then why do you want to be associated with something good? So ideally, the conversation should be around affordability as opposed to being cheap. Is there a lot to be done? Definitely yes. Is there a lot that has been done? Definitely yes. But I want to talk about two particular areas that have impressed, and that's in terms of our global perception of made in Rwanda, and then the other one is on the financial side of things. The global perception of certain brands, and I'll give examples of at the risk of giving people free publicity.
Free advertising.
But in the clothing side, for sure. In addition to Uzi collections, most of the guys in the fashion industry have really done justice for themselves. Motions, House of Teo, whoever it is, most of them have really upped their game. The guys of Uzuri KY, the sandals are extremely amazing. When you're flying through the airport, the shoes and handbags that are available in transit,
which we'll get to later.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So it's extremely amazing. But now, again, we have set our bar very high, and now we have to keep it up there. So largely to do with now volume, right? If you have a platform like Alibaba, if you have a platform like Macy's, if you have a platform like all these other platforms that are out there, how ready are you to perform at that level? I think that's really the question around keeping the quality and up there. Now I want to talk about on the financial side of things, and if it is especially around Rwandan companies listing on the stock exchange. We need to see more of that happening, so that the Made in Rwanda story is not only about fabric and food and what have you, but it's also to do with internationalizing the way we do business. We had Simera the other day, but it would be
Simera, I mean, for our viewers who
Yes.
are not in Rwanda, being the cement plant
the cement
in Rwanda.
guys.
Yes.
It would be very nice to see, the other purely Rwandan companies, the other Rwandan companies like, I don't see. It would be nice to see the likes of Ruriba, for example, and the others. I think that's where it will make a difference, like from a business perspective. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, Brenna. 5 years down the lane, what do we need to do better, or what do you actually even want to appreciate with the Made in Rwanda campaign?
I think there's so much progress that has been made, especially in terms of brand awareness, Made in Rwanda. Personally, I'm very passionate about the tea, the rebranding of the tea. It looks so good, the tea, the coffee. There's so much that is being done in terms of brand awareness. But I feel that there are issues around the value chain for Made in Rwanda. And you see that with the final product. Because when you take different samples, you'll find that Made in Rwanda is not really competitive. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the value chain.
Can you just, before you go to the value chain, when you say it's not really that competitive, in contrast to which other markets, in contrast
Imports.
to which other countries?
Imports.
Okay.
Yeah. If
with what we import in Rwanda,
Yeah.
yes.
If you
in terms
compare
of quality,
with,
in terms of
yes.
volume, in terms of, yes.
I mean, across.
Yes.
Across. It's, we are not yet there in terms of competitiveness. Even when the quality is good, for instance, I can speak about
I mean,
the
you're
tea.
wearing good quality, just, but you said you don't want to talk about garments and textiles, but
Yeah.
yes, going
Let
back
me
to
talk about the tea.
Yes, the tea.
That I like very much.
Yes.
Rwandan tea is actually really, really good. Yeah. And they've done a lot in terms of improving the packaging but beyond the Rwandan market, we know that it's beginning to even fetch better prices at the auction. We cannot say the same for the other Made in Rwanda products. Now, I feel that goes back to the cost of production. The cost of production, access to raw materials. So when you look at most of the Made in Rwanda products, what we actually call made in Rwanda sometimes is not 100% made in Rwanda. They would have imported bits of, bits of whatever product. So, and that, when it involves imports of the raw materials, sometimes it just changes the pricing. It affects fundamentally the pricing. Now, it's getting worse now because of COVID, because COVID has disrupted, global trade, and it's just difficult, trade logistics at the moment. So when you speak to most entrepreneurs, they're struggling with accessing raw materials. So I feel that going forward right now, whoever is in charge of Made in Rwanda, they should be focusing on addressing access to raw materials so that we don't lose momentum. Because just before COVID, we were seeing a lot happening. But right now, when you talk to most entrepreneurs, they are struggling in terms of access to raw materials. The cost of transport has tripled for most of them. So if you place an order today, the minimum on average for a Made in Rwanda product, 30 days, 40 days, and sometimes if someone is really efficient, it will be 50 days. So if you are a policymaker, I think, in charge of Made in Rwanda, you want to see how you reduce the pressure on these businesses that are trying to put in the effort. So for me, it's one, focusing on improving the value chain, the cost of production, addressing the cost of production so that the products are competitive. Because we still have a lot to do in terms of the quality. There's so much effort in terms of duplication, because we see Rwandan entrepreneurs trying to duplicate some products. But when you compare the quality, again, we still have issues. Yeah.
Can I just make a comment around the food value chain? And that's really the point that Bana is raising. It is still very, very painful that it is cheaper and more efficient for any businessman to import chicken wings than breeding chicken and eventually having a good poultry farm and slaughtering chicken. It's still way cheaper to import
chicken wings and fish,
than have fish in all the lakes that we have. Is still way cheaper.
Why is this though?
Again, it's the point that Bana was raising around the value chain, the cost of doing so. Yeah. So if for example, if you're to look at chicken business, there is first of all the feed. The feed that is either for generally animal feed, so whether it is for cows or for chicken or for fish, or even for goats, because these days they're done at a decent commercial scale. The inputs that go into preparing animal feed, a lot of that is imported. And then the other costs of production: power, labor, land, cost of finance. If you look at the entire value chain, as Bana was putting it, it renders the cost of production ultimately competitive. So when you just put it on a weighing scale where some countries do not have those problems, it ends up being extremely cheaper for a businessman who has a huge contract with all the hotels in this town to bring in chicken wings from, for argument's sake, Indonesia, than work with the local farmers.
Yeah, and also failure to address the issues around the value chain, I think in the long term creates cartels, because you will have the few that have the money that can essentially just buy out whoever cannot afford.
A monopoly, if you will.
Yes, So you eventually have cartels that take over, and it just becomes impossible for any other genuine entrepreneur to emerge. So you want to avoid that by at least making it relatively easier for anybody interested in the business to be able to find the raw materials.
My next question would be to both of you. I mean, you've weighed in, you've given your very informative opinions on the Made in Rwanda campaign. We appreciate it. It's been 5 years and there's been massive inroads made. Trade deficits where a bit of the contribution in this has been through the Made in Rwanda campaign and products and services. But I would like, for instance, if the ministry, if earlier on you mentioned if the people were in charge, I would say my first point would be the Ministry of Trade and Industry. What sort of recommendations, so what sort of ideas would you give or would you want to share here on this platform based on what you said on the way forward for the next 5 years? And Charles, I'll start with you.
Again, we've said this before in multiple shows that we've had around the Made in Rwanda conversations, that let's not have a short-term view of this. The Made in Rwanda campaign is a marathon; it's not a sprint. So that's the first thing: mindset change.
I like that you say it's not a sprint.
It's not a sprint; it's a marathon. So the first thing that we all need to put in our minds is mindset change. Even for where we have made progress, and that's with clothing and the fashion industry, it's not been overnight.
Absolutely not.
Right. Even in entertainment, to the extent where we have the likes of Bruce Melody being more attractive than the likes of Diamond Platinums at a show, and East African promotions saying we're going to have a show that is entirely
Strictly
made in
Rwandan,
Rwanda, and it still sells out. It's taken us decades. So let's appreciate that it's a marathon. So that's the first point I want to raise. The second point I want to raise is because we appreciate that it's a marathon, let's look at step by step. If it is agriculture and the entire agriculture value chain, what does that farmer need to say, I am not going to grow beans that I can harvest 4 times in a year, but I'm going to grow soya bean that will be bought by 3 different companies, or I'll do honey, or I'll do wheat, or I'll do all these other crops, cash crops, because there is a financial incentive.
And a financial gain.
Yes, and a better financial gain. Politics and political mileage is for political appointees. The farmer needs bread on the table. So let's first appreciate. Let's not put the farmers into politics. Let's show them where they benefit and things like that. Yes.
Made in Rwanda. Before we go to one of our tweets that are coming in on the Made in Rwanda campaign, which we're going to focus on. If you were talking to the ministry or policymakers, decision makers on this campaign and policy that was put in 2 years after the campaign started in 2015. Brenna, what would you say to them?
First of all, I want to clarify, I don't think that even with textile, we are there yet. If you go to Motions, which is a big luxury brand at the moment, and you ask for 10,000 pieces.
In terms of volume?
Yes, 10,000 pieces.
Would they deliver?
Yes, I don't think so. I don't think so. So even with textile, yes, we are moving from 20 to 50 pieces. But if you really want to create more jobs and more value in the economy, we are saying Motions should be doing 10,000. That should be target. So I think for me, the key recommendation would be to address the factors, the cost of production, essentially, because that's...
Electricity, water,
yes,
everything else in between.
I mean, if we look at electricity, we have electricity, which across the region, actually, they don't have. And this I've noticed during the lockdown, that most of my colleagues across the region always have power cuts and they're complaining. We have the electricity, but it's too expensive. Okay, so you can imagine for an emerging entrepreneur, transport, we'll talk about transport, the cost of transport, it's really high. We have to address. So,
do you think incentives also, I know there have been incentives for Made in Rwanda, but really to do with electronics and agribusiness and so forth and so on, do you think we should widen the scope of incentives to really go across the board when it comes to Made in Rwanda, not only in products but also services?
Well,
I'm just asking, would this help answer your question of the issues that we're facing? Expensive cost of business.
Well, there's a whole unit, I'm sure, somewhere in the ministry that is is focused on competitiveness.
Yes.
So I wouldn't want to, to get involved in their work. But I'm very sure that the cost of business, the cost of production has to really go down for Made in Rwanda brands to be competitive. And we continue to see this, that despite all the progress, our products are not yet as competitive in terms of pricing across the region. As we integrate more and look at the opportunities provided by the CFTA, Made in Rwanda products have to be competitive. Now, one might argue that we will first focus on the domestic market. But even with that, we've seen issues around affordability, even for the domestic market. So even if we just say, let us forget about export and just address
the domestic market, yes,
what you would call import substitution, you have to first deal with the cost of production. Yeah.
Before we go to the next topic, just to both of you, what do you think the perception is of Made in Rwanda? And this is from a layman's perspective. I mean, going to buy a pair of shoes, going to buy a service that's made in Rwanda. For you people who live in Rwanda, buy Made in Rwanda, live and breathe, Made in Rwanda to a certain degree. What do you think the perception is when this campaign started? I know we had this show in 2018, and we had a lot of viewers, we had a lot of people, reaching out to us and saying, Made in Rwanda is not going to work. We cancelled secondhand clothing, we cancelled chagua, so to speak. Right now, what is your perception of Made in Rwanda in terms of quality, content, brand? What is your perception? This is not to do with numbers and figures, but
it actually has to do with.
What is Bernard? What is your perception?
With numbers, it has
5 years
to do,
later.
Yes, it has to do with numbers,
okay,
and figures, and I will explain why. Today, we have quite a bit of good products, actually, good quality, excellent quality, world-class quality, Made in Rwanda products. But in terms of pricing, again, it's a problem.
So when you say in terms of pricing, I just want to, I'm sorry, and I'm going to jump the gun a bit.
Yeah.
And I said I would not speak about this. Charles, Bernard, we had this conversation, I think 3 weeks ago after one of our shows, and we were talking about some of the prices that came from a certain brand, a certain design house here, whereby, a particular brand of clothing cost $500,000 francs. And Charles, I remember you telling me, Dana, it's a luxury brand. If you cannot afford it, move on. It's the same way you can afford Louis Vuitton, internationally. You'll afford maybe another international brand that's cheaper. You move on. So, you talked about costs and you talk about, pricing. What's your take on that?
So to be honest, the quality.
Let's not keep it hidden. We're talking about notions right now. And I think Moses does an amazing job, but I know when it came on social media, everyone just went a bit crazy with the prices. But it's a luxury brand. If it's not for you, then you move on.
The quality is there.
Yeah.
The quality is there. But what you want to make sure is that as many people as possible can afford these products. Yeah. And yes, we understand that luxury is meant for a certain class.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, we know that the aspirations of 2050 is that you have more Rwandans migrate into the middle class. Yeah. So what you want to see Motions do is that by 2050, Motions at least can produce again 10,000 pieces that are affordable to more Rwandans.
And this goes back to your point of volume.
Yeah.
Charles?
You asked perception. I believe that the elite are associated, again, generally speaking, the elite are associated with Made in Rwanda out of patriotism. Those who do not associate with Made in Rwanda out of patriotism are the exception.
But does your patriotism equal your wallet, Charles?
You asked me for my opinion and my perception.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Those who, and those the elite, they are at the risk of repeating myself, they associate with it for patriotism. Those who do not associate with it for patriotism are the exception. Now, those who are not elitist, they perceive Made in Rwanda as something that's supposed to be cheap. I rest my case.
Okay, Charles. Enigma, you're an enigma as usual. I just want us to read a couple of tweets.
No, I think his point has been made.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, we have many people that think like that. You know.
Unfortunately, we have many people that think
yes,
like
that think that made in Rwanda means cheap.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault. It's for a reason.
But I think, honestly, I know my role here is to kind of balance things between you two, always butting heads. But I think it's a bit of both. I think Made in Rwanda should be accessible and affordable. And I also think Made in Rwanda should also have the right to be as luxury brand as it is internationally.
Yeah, but there are two levels.
It's both ways.
You know, I totally agree with you.
It has the autonomy and the luxury. You know, the opportunity and the choice to be as affordable as possible to Rwandans. It also has, if Motions wants to charge 500,000 francs for Mishanana, let him do it.
I fully agree with you.
Yeah, because there are two elements.
Yeah.
There are two elements of Made in Rwanda. Made in Rwanda for local consumption, Made in Rwanda for export.
Export, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and I like the way you brought back this conversation to domestic and export.
So Motions doesn't have to be limited. Remember, we are in a global village.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
I hear you.
We need to actually have more Rwandan companies that can produce for the global market. I think that's where we should be targeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd like us to just read a couple of tweets based on this topic before we move to the next topic. And the first is from Mhano Jules. And Mhano says that Made in Rwanda campaign is doing great and its strategy of reducing importation is somehow being achieved, but we need to increase products in science and technology. Before we go to our next tweet, what do you have to say? Because we started this conversation saying that it has diversified. It's no longer textile, garments, leather, and so forth and so on. We have, you know, marathons, we have e-mobility solutions. What do you think about him saying we should diversify more to to technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we have the likes of Carnegie Mellon.
Yes.
You know, that's why we have XIII. Yeah. Hosted here, mathematical sciences.
Yes.
There's a lot of work happening, but it just takes a bit of time, you know, before you can actually see the results. But I think in terms of policy, we can see there's a clear focus on innovation, which should drive science and technology. Yeah.
Do you want to weigh in on that before you go to our next tweet?
I'm happy to go to the next topic.
Okay. We also have another tweet based on what we're talking about right now, Made in Rwanda, and this comes from Emma. And Emma states that the Made in Rwanda policy is a step in the right direction, but there should be emphasis on mind shift of our entrepreneurs. Their innovations should aim at providing global solutions to the global community rather than focusing on a small Rwandan market. Let's think big. Absolutely, I cannot agree with you more, Emma, and that's what you said, Brenda, just now. Like, let's expand our thinking, let's expand our market strategy, not only in Rwanda and the region, but, you know, internationally. And our last tweet, as we're talking about the Made in Rwanda campaign and reviewing it 5 years after its launch, is from Gabo, who says, help me understand why always Made in Rwanda products cost at higher prices, even more than imported ones. Could this ever help in reducing our country's imports compared to exports as a landlocked country? Brenda, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah,
because
I think
it speaks to what you've just been saying.
We kind of touched a bit of that. So it is work in progress, really. Most of these things are in work in progress, because if you look at the special economic zone, there's so much work that has been going on in terms of facilitating the entrepreneurs in the special economic zone, putting the infrastructure. But these things take time. And now with COVID,
disrupt of the highest degree.
Yes. Yeah, but it's work in progress. And I think if you look at overall what is happening within the different sectors, it's towards the right direction. We simply have to maintain the momentum and do more now because of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to go to our next topic. Charles traveled last week. And we don't know where he went, who he saw, who he met with. But Charles, you had the privilege of traveling during this period of, the coronavirus pandemic. And we know that Kigali International Airport officially opened on 1st August 2020. And this was after over 4 months closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that new measures have been put in place to enable passengers to travel safely. I know the airport, the airport's company as well, has been reassuring passengers and putting all these measures into place to ensure safe travel. For instance, we know that, check-in time is usually 2 hours. It's now like 4 hours.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, it's actually 4 hours.
4 hours.
And if you have your family or your clan coming to receive you at the airport, that's not happening anymore. Okay. You go, there's no reception. And also, all travelers arriving in Rwanda must have tested negative for COVID 72 hours, within 72 hours of departure. So we know these are some of the things. We know Rwanda Airports Company, Kigali International Airport, has said this, put it in the public way before opening on 1st of August 2020. Charles, before we go to our next topic, I know I'm personally excited to hear about your travels. What is air travel like as a Rwandan, from the Rwandan airport, using Rwandair during this period of COVID-19?
I think, first of all, Diana, you owe me a bottle of wine for making me a subject of the show. The dry rosé will be my choice. But first of all, we need to understand that travel and air travel is an entire industry. So for governments to make the very bold move of opening their air space and air travel in the middle of COVID with rising numbers, no vaccine yet, it's a deep dive in the ocean of sharks. So I really need to salute the Rwandan government for that. That's one bit. But I want to also, since you've thrown me in the front line, share my personal experience. I think just to correct you, it's no longer 72 hours; it's 120 hours.
Yes,
that's interesting.
as of 2 weeks ago. So it's 2 weeks today. Yeah. So that is extremely helpful.
So just break that down again. It's
so in as long as your COVID certificate is valid for 120 hours,
that's like 4 days.
I think about 4 days.
Almost 4 days, or 4.5 days. Yeah.
You can come into the country. So I see my story. I really wanted to do something in Nairobi last week. I had 2 days of meetings, and I wanted to use the Rwandan certificate to go and come back. Now, the experience is extremely amazing. First of all, it's not exactly true that you need to check in 4 hours in advance, because Rwandair these days gives you the ability to be able to check in online.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
exactly.
That's a huge relief. But I think when Rwandair announced that you have to check in online, when you go up to immigration, they ask you for a boarding pass, a printed boarding pass, and you have to go back down and get a printed boarding pass, which is not the greatest of experiences. But I want to say a few things that are extremely impressive. When you land in Jomo Kenyatta Airport, the way passengers who are coming from Rwanda, who are not in transit, are treated is very different from the passengers who are either in transit or who are coming from other countries. So it says so much about the way they trust how we are managing our COVID situation and what have you. It's pretty much straightforward. You know, the Ministry of Health of Kenya has a form that you download. It gives you a QR code. You've already been sent an email with your COVID certificate. So it's very easy. So you get to the airport and, you know, all these forms are downloaded on your phone. No one is touching any paper. It's fantastic. There's a form, a customs form that Rwandair guys, it's a Kenyan customs form that Rwandair staff move around distributing on the plane. I still have it up to today. I went and came back and still waited, looked for somebody who would ask me for it. No one asked me for it. So it's a blend of analogy and archaic way of travel and the new way of travel. So that is That is extremely good. The return, obviously, because you're going to a more COVID-strict country, the experience is totally different. Even for us who are coming back home, it was a huge problem. So for instance, and I'll give you 2 examples. When you're traveling into Rwanda, the Rwandan government requires that you have, well, of course, the COVID negative certificate that is not dated more than 120 hours.
And you said like 4 days maybe?
Yeah. And you also have to have booked a hotel and where you will go to as you wait for your COVID results, because you'll be tested on arrival.
So from the airport, you don't go straight home? You go to a hotel, but yes, it's at your expense?
Yes, at your expense.
Exactly.
But that hotel should have sent you an email confirming your
So prior to travel, these are all the things you should have already thought of and finalized.
COVID test.
And hopefully you're negative as you sit with us right now.
would not be together. Then you ought to have your hotel booking on there. And then there's a third one that, from my experience, only the airline people there when you're boarding knew about it. No. At the moment of checking in, not boarding, checking in.
Okay.
And that's the passenger locator form. So you go onto the RBC website, download, fill in a form, and it's about 5 pages. Asks you who you are, where you're coming from, your names, blah, 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 blah. You upload your ID or passport, depending on your travel document. You upload your COVID certificate. You upload your hotel booking. Now, bear in mind that for very many passengers, because at this particular moment, 2.5 hours, 3 hours to flight time when we were checking in, we were about 12 passengers, and nobody knew about that. So at a moment when I thought I was a careless guy, I realized it can't be 12 careless passengers. And I engaged the duty manager, and she was also in a bit of a shock. So I think there's a coordination issue, and probably it's a message that RBC, Rwandair, and the travel agencies
need to talk more.
Yes. So by the time you're booking your tickets, because they will remind you 2 hours to check time, check in, they'll send you an email, please remember, gets closed at this time, and so on and so forth. So I think that is an area that can be that can be improved. The rest is pretty smooth. Once you've cleared that and you have all that in place, you'll come in. You'll go through the same process at boarding. You'll go through the same process when you land in Rwanda. There's designated transport to take you to your hotel. When you get to your hotel, you'll get tested and you'll wait for your results.
How long?
You get your results in a maximum of 24 hours. But here is one thing that they have not considered. That depending on the time your flight arrives, there is a likelihood of you spending more than one night at the hotel. For 2 reasons. One, because of curfew.
Actually, the next part of this conversation, I wanted to ask, in terms of curfew, how were you easily facilitated to travel?
No, it's fine,
curfew?
because
I think that's when it's straightforward with the National Police and the clearance.
It's not a problem. If there are cars that are either going to the airport or coming from the airport, it's not a problem. As in the cab I used to the hotel I was going to, I was with an elderly Brazilian couple, and they were really impressed that so it's not an issue. That's not the issue. But if your results delay for any reason, and you can imagine if you're going to be tested at 11 p.m., your results will most likely come at 11 p.m. on the following day.
But why will you go and test at 11 p.m.? Your flight.
Depending on your flight, because you're tested at the hotel on arrival. So I'll give you a practice example. My flight touched down at 10:20 p.m.
Okay. Touchdown
in Kanombe.
Yes, in Kigali.
I didn't get to my hotel till 11. right? So giving them the benefit of doubt, if it's 24 hours, it's 11 p.m. So fast forward, the following day reaches, it's coming to curfew freeze, and I do not have my results yet.
So you just spend another time in the hotel, but that's at your expense.
Yeah, so you potentially spend 2 nights at the hotel when, you know, I hope it hasn't happened to anybody else. I think I was too stubborn to allow that I spend another night in the hotel, but I think that's another gray area. Yeah. I think the other one really, again, so sorry, I skipped a bit. I said the first reason that would make you potentially spend another night in the hotel is curfew, because even if your results came out at 9 p.m., you can't leave at 9. You can't leave after even 8:40 unless you live next to the hotel. The other one is really in terms of, and I want to think with my little IT brains, that because we are doing mass testing, there's naturally a queue of tests that will go through the SMSing and emailing systems. And therefore, your email or SMS may come in a lot late. And I got my test results on a Monday, yet I had checked out of the hotel on a Saturday. That's when I got my message.
So what's your recommendation, or what's your advice on that to the people who are in charge?
I believe, and I really want to really give a thumbs up to the RBC staff on this one, because what I challenge them to do is that think a little bit out of the box. If you can go into the system and see somebody's status, and then recommend that the person checks out, and that's exactly what happened, and all was good. So if there can be a more efficient way of communicating people's results, that would be a lot better. I would link it directly to travel.
I think, I personally, I mean, I went for a test last week. I got my results in less than, literally, I think in 11, between 10 and 12 hours. I think that's efficient enough. I mean, do you think...
Comparatively, but
comparatively to what? I mean, if you're going to compare it to like...
I've been told that in Kenya it can take 3 days.
No, in the US it even takes longer, so...
Yeah. No, but I think let's put things in context. I think it's in relation to travel.
In relation to travel.
It's in relation to travel. If you have 20 hours, your results come back in 24 hours, that already cuts off a whole day of your travel going back and forth. Then you can only wait for your results to come, and then you book your flights. And then you cannot come back into the country, say on the day of your results, of your certificate expiring. So there is still a bit of fine tuning around.
But generally speaking, yes. Were you impressed? I mean, were you
absolutely impressed?
I'd like
us
to read a tweet before we go to the next topic, which is really big. And Brenna, I would like to hear from you on this particular topic. But we just have a tweet very quickly to read, and this is also an air travel, and this is something that came from the CEO of Rwandair, and this tweet is from early on today, and it says that it's from Rwanda Convention Bureau, but it's from CEO of Rwandair, Mihon Makolo, who says that we have been encouraging people to book tickets online as opposed to booking at our offices. We put hand sanitizers at all sanitizer stations across the airport, and we also have markers on the floor to ensure social distancing before boarding. So for people who are traveling online, please try and book your tickets online and understand that the airport, like as Charlie has said, the preventative measures to just really ensure the safety of people during COVID. And it's really interesting to hear from you, Charlie, on traveling as a Rwandan during this period on our national carrier.
And by the way, the experience is great. I mean, I want to give credit really where it's due. The staff are very friendly at the airport. Are
those robots? Do those robots move around?
The robots,
I think you saw the robots
in your face and and in your ears and all the time. They're very friendly, and they accept that.
Fantastic.
There's a level of preparedness that is at another level. hear one complaint, though, that before the airport was closed for COVID, different taxi operators could operate at the airports. There was even an association of taxi operators that are licensed to go to the airport. Apparently, when the airport was opened again, that was not the case. Only a particular company was told they are now the ones who are allowed to go in there. So there's a bit of bitterness from a section
sure
of
that
people in that space.
It was an informed decision as well.
I
cannot
comment.
Yeah, well, Charles, it's great hearing about that. I'm assuming you traveled around the region. Great to have you back. And yeah, it's interesting to know because for a lot of people, there's a sort of fear when you say traveling and during this pandemic.
No, people should travel. The tickets are even cheaper.
Really?
Yes, my flight to Nairobi, just the ticket alone cost me, I think, $250
as opposed to around $400 plus.
Yes, but when you add the other things, the COVID test going is cheaper than the COVID test when you have arrived. The one when you arrive is about $15 more expensive. Yeah. When you add I think the guys at Rwanda and RBC and the hoteliers industry have spoken to make sure that how much was the ticket before? It was $400. Please make sure they spend $400.
Let's go to the most important topic. Yes. September was the proposed month where schools were supposed to open in Rwanda due to they were closed since March based on the coronavirus pandemic. So in a cabinet meeting on August 14th, it was stated that schools would remain closed based on further health assessment on how to proceed, and sufficient time on how to inform this decision. So all public schools across the country are still closed, and remote learning, e-learning, learning online has been encouraged and promoted. Now, the question here is that we've had debate on our social media platforms on the square since we started this topic. We said this is what we're going to talk about tonight, and a lot of people say, a lot of people have said that the closure of schools has exacerbated problems to do with, drug abuse amongst young people, sexual violence, teenage pregnancies. But other people actually say that if schools were to open, forget about handling this pandemic. We would be completely and utterly incapacitated. So my question to you in the very few minutes that we have left, Berna, I'd like to start with you. What's your take on this?
I think we must continue to be guided by science and evidence. It doesn't matter what we want or wish. There's science, there's evidence, and that policy should be guided by that, despite our feelings. But the reality also is that the things that you mentioned, we have seen that the prolonged closure of schools really has also become a problem for parents, especially because balancing, helping children at home with, for instance, homework, ensuring that they are actually studying online, and then working from home, the pressure is so much on parents. And it's even worse in homes where you have, for instance, single parents. They have to work, and they also have to manage the children. We are also seeing increasingly from the lobbyists who follow these issues of women and gender that there's a risk that many young girls will drop out of school due to the prolonged closure. We also know that there are mental issues around this because schools are not supposed to be closed. Yeah, so if they're closed, of course, there's a whole magnitude of problems. And we also must remember that there's a financial cost to this, because once schools are open, there's a value chain. You forgive me for refining.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Suppliers of schools, the food, right. Everything.
Exactly.
If schools are closed, you have so many people who are unemployed. Imagine the teachers who since March. Not everybody has remained on
For
the
the people
payroll.
who feed the schools, boarding schools, for instance.
Yes.
The cleaners and so forth and so on.
So I feel that we'll, of course, be guided by the evidence and science. But we are at a point where we have to look at mitigation and also continue supporting the recovery of the economy. And I feel that the longer it takes to open the schools, definitely it also kind of paralyzes the economy. So it's a tough one.
I feel like it's a tough one. You know, there's no silver bullet. There's no answer. So I like the fact that you've weighed out we need to be led by science, but at the same time, you're also highlighting the fact that the value chain, people, families, communities are going to suffer.
Yeah,
continuously they're already suffering with the closure.
They're already suffering, but
and I'm not asking you for a solution. It's just what is your take on the matter?
I mean, if you see what government has been doing with there was a pilot of home-based care for COVID cases. I think part of that is to prepare for schools to open because some of the COVID cases are in schools, so it may also allow space. So I'm sure that there are people working on all these things, and they also understand what the prolonged closure of schools. And this week also the WHO, I think, was very clear, saying you can't keep schools closed for forever, and also the gap that has emerged. There are those that have accessed e-learning. Not everybody. We still have many.
Especially in Rwanda, like remote learning, e-learning is for a very privileged few.
Yes, we still have so many that have missed out on e-learning, despite having the programs on radio and television. And for girls especially, school is more than just a place where they go and learn. You know, for girls, it's a place where they feel safe. And then we also have to think about nutrition. For most children, the school feeding program really helps and to keep them in school. So if that is not there, you can imagine what's happening. We will have to look at malnutrition again, the numbers, because we know most of the work around school feeding also helps address malnutrition. So it's a tough job.
It is.
I don't envy whoever is in charge, but hopefully the situation will get better. And
Charles, would you like to say anything on it before we go to the feed?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to draw a very clear distinction between going to school and being educated. What the private schools and the privileged, as Diana calls them, and the other people who can afford what they are doing, they are actually educating, and it's extremely unfortunate. But take it or leave it. My finger in the air assumption is about only 1% of school-going kids are being educated, because not everybody is able to go to school. With the other 99% being able to only get educated when they go to school. Now, because they are unable to go to school, they are lacking the education and everything that comes with the education, the feeding and the knowledge.
Because education it's holistic.
Yes,
it's not a
holistic.
silo.
Yes,
it's just not being in a classroom.
So that's one. The second thing is, it's also extremely important that we do not generalize. Primary will be totally different from secondary, and that will be totally different from tertiary, and college, and whatever higher learning is. Yeah. For instance, if you look at higher learning institutions, they have been hit by double COVID. The Higher Education Council has come up and said, by the time we come out of COVID, you must be owning your own premises. Wow. And we're not going to tolerate people who rent. So the let's not look at it very, very holistically. Primary and secondary schools aim to educate kids who are able to be taken by the higher learning institutions. Higher learning institutions aim to produce a product that is marketable for the labor market. So it is the levels of impact are also very different. That's why it's a lot easier, for example, to say that a university will work out of its own premises 10, 15 years after they have tested the waters. Most primary or secondary schools will be within 2-3 years, and they are sorted. So there is no one size fits all in terms of this preparation. But I totally agree with Bana. We need to be guided by science and also accept that this is a dead year.
It is. I'd like us to just go very quickly to our tweets. We have a very few minutes left. This is always how it is on burning issues. So the first tweet is from someone called, again, Mhano, who states that opening schools by September is still impossible if we're getting 200 cases a day. Opening them earlier will depend on how we follow safety measures. And this really speaks to, the safety measures being governed by science and not feelings and not emotions and what have you. The next
and also, just to point out that if you observe the trend with the cases, there's more testing that is being done.
Absolutely,
Yes. So we can expect that with more testing, the cases will definitely go up.
Yes,
absolutely.
That's a very good point.
Absolutely. We also have another tweet from Steve Rugwakocho, who states that you can't try the impossible and you can easily do the difficult with easy. It's an obvious impossibility from the look of things. Schools in Rwanda cannot reopen come September 2nd amid the heightened COVID-19 spread. So Steve is very clear on the fact that, let's not even think about September.
The schools will be open.
Yes.
I think they said they said the schools will be open in September, but they just didn't precise the year.
Anyway,
it could be September.
We have another tweet before we just end, coming from Frank Chigenza, who is also a regular viewer and contributor to the Square. Thank you, Frank. And he states that, I hope the government can forge a plan to reopen schools soon. So he's different from the last couple of tweets that we've seen. He says that the closure is causing significant mental health and behavioral problems. We are all facing a moment in time between what used to be normal and what the future could be. Bold decisions must be taken.
Yes.
So Frank is challenging literally everything that we've been saying tonight and what the government stance is. And then also from Frank, he states that scientific fact, young persons and children are the least susceptible to COVID-19, unlike mental health illness, drug abuse, sexual violence, and teen pregnancy being exacerbated by schools closure. Let's not put all our eggs in one basket. So we've come to the end of the show. I would like to hear closing remarks on everything we've talked about. If you can just pick one topic, Charles, whether it's air travel, whether it's schools, whether it's made in Rwanda. Just what are your closing remarks on this show as we try and fit as many topics as our viewers have asked us to discuss tonight? Charles,
as we walk out,
briefly.
As we walk out of the studio tonight, I hope we don't go into a lockdown.
Brenna, very briefly.
I don't think we can afford another lockdown. I think we simply have to enforce safety guidelines. Regarding Made in Rwanda, I think it is so important that the cost of production goes down to make our products competitive.
Thank you very much. We come to the end of the show. Time passes so quickly. Thank you so much to our viewers on our Burning Issues edition 13. This means 13 months, a year plus, listening to you and engaging with you. Thank you very much to our viewers. Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, our partners, thank you for keeping supporting the Square. Have a good night. Thank you for watching us and see you again next week. Good night.